and I'm the executive director and founder of the Austin Smart City Alliance. And I'm one of the team of people that brings the Texas Smart City Summit together. We've done a couple of these summits, one in person and one online. We will probably do another one in person and more hybrid this fall. But in between these events, which have been very successful, we wanted to continue to keep conversations going and infusing expertise in. So it wasn't just getting together once a year among ourselves. And so we started this Texas Smart City series talks between the Texas Smart City Summits. These events, let me advance the slide. It's a twice monthly, and we'll probably go to once monthly as we're moving towards another summit in a few months. These are presentations from leaders in technology, business, government, and education. And it's really about them sharing their experience and expertise in smart cities, in smart city projects, and smart city approaches, and smart city implementation efforts, basically in the practices and experiences of smart cities. So we do it in this lunch and learn format. At least it's lunch and learn according to the time zone in Texas, where we're hosting it. I realize Yulia is probably about to eat dinner in Poland. The speakers include a variety of experts, as we said, from from Texas cities, but also national and global as well. So it's called the Texas Smart City Series because it's hosted by the smart city efforts in Texas, not because it's of exclusive interest to them. We hope that it has national and global appeal, and we will make sure that it always has some national and global speakers in it as well. I did want to tell you about some upcoming events to make sure that you're aware of them. On May 26th, the Austin Smart City Alliance is going to host its first in-person networking happy hour in what seems like 100 years, but I think it's probably only a year and a half. We're excited to get people back together. It's going to be at an outdoor, spaced out venue on the east side of Austin called Easy Tiger. They have a new location there. They have big picnic tables spaced out. We're asking people to only come if vaccinated. We're not going to be checking vaccination cards and taking and giving tests on site, but we're asking people to come if vaccinated, still of course wear a mask. But the good news is that so many people in Austin and in Texas are getting vaccinated so rapidly that we felt we could finally bring in-person events back. And so look for us to host a networking event every month, and that will be open to all of our Texas Smart City colleagues and anyone that is interested in getting together and talking about smart cities. We have a couple of things that we're going to do with this one to get inputs from people about the kinds of outcomes you'd like to see smart cities projects have in the second half of the year and in the years ahead. So it'll be mostly shaking hands, drinking beers or non-beers, talking and reconnecting, but there will be some input gathering as well that we plan to fold into our programming. On June 23rd, we'll have another topic in the Texas Smart City series. It will not be on June 9th for scheduling conflict reasons, but it'll be on June 23rd, and we'll announce that soon. I did want to put a plug in here. Our own Chelsea Collier, who's part of the planning group for the Texas Smart City series, is going to give a presentation with someone you've already seen speak in this series, Charlie Catlett, on smarter cities as part of the Austin Forum on Technology and Society event series. That is both in person and online. And certainly ASCA will support that event. And certainly we hope that our Texas Smart Cities series colleagues will as well. I didn't get a chance because I typed it into the slide right before this event, but I'm sure Jen, who knows Chelsea well, will want North Texas to support it, and we'll make sure Houston, and we reach out to Houston and San Antonio as well. There'll be some other events. We are just beginning to put together a calendar for the summer. So we might go a little crazy because we miss seeing everybody so much, but I did want to put these three events out there for you now. And with that, I want to turn it over to Jen Sanders. Her presentation is on moving from smart cities to smart regions and beyond, and Jen is exactly the person to speak on this. She co-founded the Dallas Innovation Alliance first, and now she has created the North Texas Innovation Alliance, and she's going to talk about smart regions. So, Jen, welcome.
Hey, thank you guys. Thank you guys for having me too. And I think there's only one of me today. If y'all were on a couple weeks ago, there were many of me because I shared the wrong link.
But
So
it's never enough.
it's never enough. I would love if there were many of
More.
I would love if there were many of me. All right. So you will notice I crossed out the next frontier because of how critical it is that we look cross jurisdictionally and really look at broader than just the city as we look to really improve quality of life and infrastructure and all the challenges that we knew we had prior to COVID, but certainly have been put on stage front and center since that point over the last couple of years. So first we'll go over the origin story without capes. Why North Texas is prime for this kind of innovation. We're not unique, but there are some unique elements to our region compared to some others. I want to highlight some peers in this space that are doing great work at the regional and state level. What we've been working on and what we were able to get done in the midst of a pandemic together, pulling together priorities for 2021, and what we're looking to do moving forward in terms of some concrete steps and some use cases we're working on, and then how we would love for y'all to get involved. So I always love to start with this. So for those of you that are not in Texas and certainly out of the country, what you may think of DFW, lots of cowboys, Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, J.R. Ewing, and oil and gas. And that wildcatting nature of this region, you know, we're very, very proud of. I'm a transplant, but 15 years, so I think I'm native now. But we really know that we've evolved past that and do a lot more things well that some of you may not be familiar with. So 23 Fortune 500 company headquarters are in our region. 328 people move to DFW every single day. We are in the top quadrant of smart cities globally in the most recent IESE index. For the top metro areas for tech jobs in 2020, we were ranked number 7 metro area in the country. Last year, we had the highest growth rate in VC funding, 66%. So we're not saying we have the most, but we have the fastest rate of growth last year. And then last year, we were ranked number 2 in the Tech Town Index behind our partner, Austin, who is on the line. So as Jay mentioned, in 2015, I co-founded the Dallas Innovation Alliance. So that was meant to be a freestanding nonprofit that could support the city of Dallas in developing and executing a smart city strategy. So we really saw ourselves as bringing best minds to the table across sector. We can move independently and outside procurement for rapid testing, kind of for the public good in the right of way. And we were really able to show that value of that model and certainly have learned from many around the country. And so our Smart Cities Living Lab in the West End was actually the fastest to market smart cities initiative in the country. We went from use case development to in the ground in under a year. And that's typically far more quickly than those types of initiatives. We have 10 concurrent projects in that 6-block corridor. So we're very proud of that. We think it demonstrates how you can get fast results to make better scaled decisions through structured organizations like this. But our vision was always that we needed to go regional next, and some specific reasons, again, for DFW, I'll talk about in a second. But first, you know, the definition of smart cities, smart regions, very, very different depending who you ask. We look at it very holistically. So how do you use new tools like technology, data alongside the community to create economic growth, quality of life, resource efficiency? And so we're really looking at how do you look cross-sector, cross-department, cross-function, because we know all of the challenges that we face today are interrelated. So we can't solve transportation without looking for housing, et cetera. So the mission of the NTXIA is to create the most connected, smart, and resilient region in the country. And I always joke, if I'm not told I'm crazy at least once a week, we're not reaching high enough. And so we'd love to get here, and certainly together, I believe that we can. So just to give a quick snapshot of our founding membership, we were founded in May of last year. So we have almost 30 municipalities, counties, agencies, private sector, universities that have all come together for about a year and a half to really look at how do we do this? What are the highest needs and what is the function and the value of an organization like this? Where does it fit in amongst other organizations that take a look at challenges through a regional lens? And why a regional approach is critical. I don't think that any of this is a surprise to the group, certainly not this group, but when we really look at blurring geographic boundaries, and there's a slide in a minute that talks about how in North Texas specifically, over 30% of our residents cross at least one county line every single day. And so when you think about critical systems needing to function, I don't care that I went from Dallas to Richardson. I want the traffic signals to work. I want to know that police and emergency response can really efficiently get there and be communicating cross jurisdiction. We know we've got aging infrastructure. Obviously, the Texans here are very, very familiar with extreme weather events after the storm in February and certainly ongoing. How do we be better prepared and resilient for those? Workforce and talent development. We look at the pipeline really from K through beyond into continuing education for mid-career workforce or to upskilling. Again, the population inflow. And we know that the complexities of a lot of these technology challenges and systems really requires, upfront standards and working together and interoperability. So how do we catch everybody up? If you've got a 30-year-old ERP, how can you even get to the point where you're layering on some of the applications that are really desirable right now? And how do you protect them? So again, we've got more than 30% cross-in. And then, just wanted to briefly touch on some of our peers across the country that we continuously share information from, learn from each other. And that's such an important element of being in this space. And I think, a unique element to smart cities, in this community that's popped up over the last 5 to 10 years is the free nature of sharing successes and failures and really wanting everyone to move faster, wanting everyone to not make the same mistakes. And certainly we're representative of that as well. So in Arizona, the Connective is their regional partnership. They launched, I think 2 years ago, and started with a really anchor partnership with Arizona State University that has several integrated centers and institutes that are focused on the future of society, future of cities and communities. And amongst many other cities, towns, their regional planning organization is heavily involved, as is COG here, and on and on. So really, they've been able to look at how do you connect dots and create these COGs of test beds alongside really heavy research component to be able to drive progress in some of the core challenges. When we look at the state of Colorado, and I don't think Tyler or Johanna were able to join, or Chelsea today, but they're doing an incredible job of pulling together a statewide initiative. And really, this is looking at, they just closed one of their challenge grant, or not challenge grants, but they had, innovation challenges across 5 problem statements. And I think they received 70 submissions to create projects and demonstrations around solving these 5 programs. I really recommend you check them out as well if you're not familiar with that alliance. And so time to brag on the region, because what we really want to do with NTXIA is keep track of, promote, and link all the great efforts that are happening within the region. We want the cities to learn from each other. We want to make it easier for cities to know what each other is doing. I think, the joke is I've never met a city with too much time, too many people, and too much money. And so one of the functions of our organization is really how are we extra arms and legs that can really laser focus on some of the technologies and the tactics and all of these pieces that can really save time and money for our members. But so some of the really great work that's been happening recently throughout the region, the first is the North Texas Center for Mobility Technologies, and this is a partnership between the Texas Research Alliance, the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and 4 of our universities. And really, this is creation for anyone can apply for matching funds up to $1 million a project to test advanced technologies and mobility, as you would imagine. And so from a speed to funding perspective, $1 million, a pilot match is not nothing. And so we're really excited to be able to use that as a tool in really developing and furthering a lot of these technologies and test beds that we're looking to do here. Internet for Dallas is a coalition that was started during the pandemic. It's over 20 members, including 12 school districts. We have municipalities, we have foundations. The DIA is part of that steering committee. And then the goal, as it was for everyone, is how do you get internet in the hands of every child, during the pandemic, during remote learning and beyond. And so a number of innovative interlocal agreements and collective purchasing and different strategies were undertaken. And quite frankly, the fastest time frame I've ever seen agreements like those go through. One of which is Dallas ISD is doing 5 private LTE network pilots to use their fiber backbone to beam out, a private network to students within a 2 to 5 mile radius of some of their core feeder pattern schools and priority zip codes. When we look holistically at the challenges, smart cities are not always about technology. As we know, this is about improving quality of life, efficiency of services, and access to resources. So the MLK Food Park was really an effort to say, how do we look at where food deserts are? How do we look at barriers to small business creation? How do we look at using underutilized spaces and create an asset for the community? So this was a vacant lot that was transformed into a food park that included a playground, included a combination of food trucks, storage containers, performance stages, and really was this community hub. But part of it was to test out recommendations for how the city should revise its permitting for mobile food vending. How do we make it easier and lower the barriers and the cost for some of these food entrepreneurs? So these local businesses and local restaurants and providers were able to be fully certified through participation here, where they'd hit challenges ahead of time, and the recommendations coming out of this will hopefully adjust the formal policies to being able to start that type of business. It ran for 6 weeks. It was extraordinarily well received. The first weekend, there were over 900 people that came, and almost half of them had never been south of Interstate 30. There's a very big north-south divide from an equity perspective, and most people have a perception about this neighborhood, and this was able to generate interaction between different communities, as well as providing a dedicated resource for that community specifically. The last two that I'll just mention here, I had a list of 30 that I was trying to pick from to highlight briefly today. The city of Richardson and UT Dallas created a formal partnership related to their Richardson IQ, which is their innovation corridor that runs along a DART line and directly through the UTD campus. This partnership is a representation of 5 new institutes that UT Dallas is creating around emerging technology and future urban problem solving with the City of Richardson's Office of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships. So they're co-locating there amongst this economic revitalization corridor, a lot of piloting, testing, lots of commercialization activity, and these dedicated research institutes. And these are the entire type of nucleus, public-private academic partnerships that we want to see, and that's obviously how we can all be successful in looking at the testing and the research and results coming out of there. The last piece, as we look at the pandemic and economic recovery and small business support, the McKinney EDC created an innovation fund right at the beginning of the pandemic. I believe it launched maybe a little bit before, but those were incentive grants for startups to form or relocate to McKinney. And they were actually able to attract 15 startups during the pandemic to move and start, and created hundreds of jobs and well over the course of those grants. And they're really looking to create innovation clusters in biotechnology and pharma and a number of others. But looking at the environment last year and being able to get that kind of movement and that kind of growth, I think is a really incredible model. I'm going to pause here, actually. Does anyone have any questions that we want to raise in the middle, or Jessica, Jay, do you recommend that we wait till the end? I know I'm throwing a lot of content at you guys. So.
You're great. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, so I would say just keep going. And people, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat too.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So a smart start shouldn't be shiny. So when we think about things like procurement, permitting, surveys, and how we get feedback from citizens, when we look at construction and roadway and potholes, when we look at the provision of Wi-Fi, these are not flying cars. We want the flying cars. We want to be prepared for them, but building that foundation is really critical. And I think intuitively we all know this, but there's still an element of shiny object syndrome well before the foundation has been laid. When you think about things like ERP systems, how are you going to get to the level of intelligent network to do these advanced things until you have built that? And so part of what we're looking at is, one, how do we find new ways to handle procurement? And two, how do you get the level of funding committed to and convince council to allocate for these not sexy projects, which sometimes can be an uphill battle when if the narrative and if the case is not clearly made. And so really looking at the start is not the most exciting, but is extraordinarily critical. So when we looked at our year one priority areas, and this really, was the back half of 2020 and coming into 2021, one of the most important things that we heard from our members was we need the creation of a directory and a centralized project repository for everything going on in the region. So we're creating something through a partner, Chrysalis, who is building this interactive platform, sortable, taggable. So if I'm a city in the region and I say, God, I really need to do X, I wonder if anyone has already done it. I wonder if anyone is planning to do it. Is anyone in the midst of writing an RFP? Can we tag on board with that? And it just really shortens the distance between A and B for the membership, and allows us to really understand where there might be gaps and not recreate the wheel. So we're building that as we speak. Obviously, we wanted to find action-oriented strategies across the region, because one commitment that I made, at the beginning when Trey and I founded the organization is y'all have a lot of committees, y'all have a lot of organizations, and we can sit around and pontificate for months and months, and I love doing that. But I really commit that this is an organization of action. So we want to be mindful and thoughtful and intentional about what we do and how we do it. But I want to make sure that y'all understand that there is a commitment to doing. So we talk a lot about the think tank meets do tank and how we can get there quickly. Another piece is these educational workshops and forums. Members a lot, especially with a lot of these emerging concepts, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't want to be caught flat-footed. And so we really create a number of different structure of workshops to be able to provide a really comprehensive view of a single challenge so that level set is really clear from the beginning. We know that policy, standard, and revenue sources, we're looking at the long-term vision and the short-term wins, as we all are. And then really looking again to leverage the structure of an organization like NTXIA to execute quickly through this consortium model. And so through, hundreds of hours of conversations and convenings and really looking to prioritize what are the 6 areas that this group wants to focus on in 2021 and probably 2022. And we centered around these 6. So one being digital inclusion and infrastructure. I think that's probably consistent with all of us. Procurement and financial models, that's the bear and the holy grail. Really looking at the economic development and workforce piece, transportation mobility. How do we look at process efficiencies via continuing the digitization that was thrust upon everybody in the midst of the pandemic, and then resilience and sustainability. And so what we like to say is we went from boiling the ocean to boiling the Great Lakes. So there's still work to do in narrowing this down, but we really wanted at a minimum to say, okay, where are we gonna put the time and the effort to make sure that we're solving the problems that are most important to the region. So the inside of the NTXIA obviously presented immediate opportunities to leverage that group, to be able to learn from each other, ask candid questions, throw things out there. So the shutdown, we actually had a meeting, one of our March convening in 2020 was on the day that Dallas County's shelter in place order went into effect. And so I thought, oh, good Lord, I can't imagine people being able to join in a day like this, even if we have 5 people join, it's worthwhile to utilize that time. We still had 30 entities and representatives join that call that day, in large part because they wanted to see how their peers were approaching it and have that dedicated time and space. And it was really, obviously, a challenge that nobody wished or could have planned for, but it was really encouraging to see the utilization of this group and their coming together around these core challenges and these immediate elements that really require this kind of collaboration. Another one was the winter storm wake up call in February. And so, as everybody was working, to scramble and look at, how are we taking care of our people, our meeting following, emerging from the storm was really around, what did we learn, obviously, and what do we feel like locally is under our control to improve, when subsequent events come up. And so things as simple as, a regional asset inventory for fuel, and understanding which facilities have enough fuel to be able to roll trucks every 6 hours to refill generators, who has generators, and so, things that would really, obviously speed up and make efficient use of time and space and protect the workers that had to be on the roads. How do we keep them on the roads as short a time period as possible? So there were learnings and some ideas that came out of that discussion that we're looking to expand upon in the coming months. And so one piece that keeps coming up is data monetization. Is that a reasonable, attainable, ethical, path for public entities to go down? And this story came out last week or perhaps 2 weeks ago around the state of Texas monetizing data. Primarily, the one that was most focused on was the DMV. And so, when we get to Q&A, I would love this group's thoughts on data monetization. What your thoughts are around that. Some people argue it's double dipping. Some people define data monetization in different ways, and but something that we're looking really closely at. And but this was something I wasn't aware of. So when I saw the figure of the revenue that came in, that was something that I'm very curious to understand more about. It also, if you're in Texas, explains why you've been getting so many calls with companies that are very, very concerned about my warranty expiring for my car, and wanting to make sure I take advantage of extensions. But that my data apparently came from this particular transaction around when my warranty expired and some of that information. So again, really kind of understanding the how, the why, and the what of that concept in the coming years. So the structure of the NTXA, just to talk through a little bit about how we built this, and knowing that we want to be agile. And so this, we may learn and grow and continue to tweak as we go, but, we're governed by a board of directors and a leadership council. This is the voting body deciding on priorities, projects, what moves forward. We see 3 branches, underneath that. One is this concept of these groups that are think tank meets do tank. And so we've structured those 6 priorities in between think tank concepts and then project teams that are more tactically driven. And then we have an industry board of advisors that I'll give some details on what that means in just a moment. And then kind of the through lines, across all of these that we leverage. One is research and evaluation. We rely heavily and leverage our academic partners. The workshops and training component that I mentioned, and then community engagement is obviously, it's a cornerstone to ensuring an understanding, education, making sure that there's two-way communication, all things that that we all know. And I think, the public sector recognizes that we need to find different ways to reach residents for a lot of reasons. So when we look at the structure of action and how we're approaching, so these overarching goals, again, is we always want to be opportunistic. We've got our 6 priorities, but we always want to be able to move and be nimble when opportunities arise. The research partnership concept, and then again, that project repository and vendor vetting is another piece of what is kind of an ongoing constant. So these 4 that we mentioned. So again, we've broken down those priorities between these tactical and more conceptual at the front end pieces, the workshops and training, and the industry council. So again, with the workshops, what we've approached so far is this concept of 360 insights. And as an example, we want to take each element of solving a problem and provide that expertise. So for example, digital infrastructure was our first. And so what we brought in a legal expert, we brought in a regulatory expert, we brought in a kind of strategic planning, technological design, a financial person on how were people paying for these networks. And then we brought in a peer city to talk about their learnings coming out of their initiative. And that was Chattanooga in that case. And so the industry council, which I'm sure a lot of y'all on the call I know are in this space, we really look at always having that voice at the table, always wanting to leverage that expertise. We also create that as a bench where members can pick up the phone and say, I want to understand more about cybersecurity and protection of critical infrastructure. I want to learn about data, and we really have that resource available. And then pilot program partners would be another example, and it's always evolving. So what we've done out of those 6 priorities in 2021 is we've launched dedicated working groups to create these communities of practice. So the 4 that we started with, we actually started with 3, and we recently added the data piece as a 4th. Again, digital infrastructure, mobility, the financial models and procurement, and then really this overarching piece of regarding data around the governance, the data sharing, and the security aspect. And so when we think about the path to action, how are we currently looking at the flow as we look to planning tactical objectives here? and outcomes. One first piece, most importantly, how do we define the use case? So how do we go now from the Great Lakes to White Rock Lake, if you're in Dallas, down into to smaller bodies of water that are attainable and achievable at the scale that we're starting from. So the working groups are responsible for the use case. As we frame and fill out, once we have the use case defined, we're looking at who else needs to be at the table, what other experts, what other partners do we want to bring in to really be able to understand and come up with tactical ideas. What is the governance model for executing on this use case? And then this is where particularly the financial models and procurement group would be layered in. As we start to look at end to end, how would we get this done? How would we pay for it? What do we need to understand from a policy standpoint? Are there zoning changes that need to be made? So we're really looking at that continuum as we plan out the programs. So, and as we continue, developing then and digging a little bit deeper, this is where we would have facilitated workshops. That could be a 360 Insights, that could be a strategic workshop to whiteboard and really come up with the end-to-end plan. And then as we, get to that point, we're really looking at what is the best tactical piece and project for us to achieve the immediate objective. And so examples, not inclusively, of what some of those paths could look like. One is a research partnership. Do we need to start there fundamentally? Is that what we need before we can do anything else? Civic innovation challenges. Some of you heard from Emily Yates a couple months ago about some of the work Philly's done in developing these innovation challenges, dedicated funds for these types of pieces, et cetera. So that's where we really want to engage in that piece. Proof of concepts, obviously, is that the most appropriate place? Are we ready to do something broader now? And that's where there's lots of P's there, because I think a heavier focus on the public-public partnership element of P3s, 4 4s or 5s or 6s is what we're seeing an acceleration in. And obviously that's highly critical, particularly around infrastructure. And so this, just to give that snapshot, right, is here's how we're looking to structure the process. And we're kind of at that place. Some of our working groups are still at layer 1, some are getting into layer 3. So we're allowing them each to work at their own pace and then filtering up to the group as decisions need to be made. And so the concepts, okay, I'm watching my time. I'm actually doing decently well for once. So when we think about the overall concepts, these are some examples of paths we're running down at this stage. So one is innovative revenue sources, including but not limited to data monetization. Obviously, everybody is looking at the federal funding coming down, whether it's, obviously the rescue plan, whether it's Jobs Act or infrastructure or whatever ends up being finalized. How do we make sure that we're shovel ready to capture that funding? And really making sure that we're maximizing the resources that are available in the planning process, let alone execution. So digital infrastructure, again, best practices in regional planning. There's a lot of elements to that. The emergency response and resiliency, again, that's responsive to learnings and needs and ideas that came out of the winter storm specifically. The data standards piece, and then resident and business engagement and recovery. And that takes a lot of forms, obviously, as well. Things like what McKinney's done, can we leverage and replicate, workforce development and pipeline programs that have emerged and been accelerated? How do we make sure that we're expanding access to those? But really, the first step is knowing what's already being done and what's been successful either in or outside of market, and what are the easiest ways to be able to execute and scale. So being aware of where there are collective buying or piggyback in existing contracts, how can everybody move more quickly, particularly when there's already demonstrated ROI to those programs. And so I'm just going to talk through 2 of the ideas that have kind of started working down the chain. So when we talk about action concepts, the financial models group, 2 different paths to focus on and take some tactical action around. One is the new revenue channels piece. The other is the Rescue Act prep and strategy. Second step, defining the needs. So really understanding, what do we mean? How do we define revenue? In some cases, revenue is defined by time efficiencies, and how do we quantify that? In some cases, it literally is, we want more dollars in the bank. What does that look like? Looking at SME and peer best practices, and that goes across both of them. So we really look to pull in and share learnings, with others. I'll go talk to groups, but everyone is very generous with their time and coming in and helping guide us as well. The initial action step is, really how do we go out and collate and pull together the ideas and proven tactics around revenue channels. And we'll be able to talk more about that and have some exciting things going on for later this spring. And then we have 360 Insights planned around the Rescue Act, specifically in preparing for federal funding, that our group is going to be participating in next week, and others in the pipeline. So that's one example of where we are in some different ways that we're approaching. The digital infrastructure space is the other one I would speak to right now. A lot of us are looking at these elements, are looking at these specific challenges. What we're looking at currently is one, again, how do we look at the P3 infrastructure? How do we look at interlocals, whether it's replication or standardization, to make those move more quickly? How are we leveraging funds that we spent last year to strategically invest these new funds, and just making sure that we're bringing everybody to the table to have those discussions? How do we define the needs? So, one is particularly with public-public partnerships around infrastructure is how do we get ahead of the legal concerns, and really look at how we develop and adjust standards or tools that we have in place around the cybersecurity risks. We're looking at things as simple but not easy as an integrated regional map, GIS map of existing conduit, publicly owned conduit, and networks. Where is their conduit available for immediate fiber deployment, and getting that single version of the truth at a regional level. So the initial action there is we're bringing in cyber and legal experts around that mitigation of shared infrastructure concerns, as well as IoT and 5G specifically as it relates to cyber. And then again, we're really pulling together. Some of our members have made it really down the pike on P3s for infrastructure like this, and at varying stages of planning. So we're going to make sure that we have them have a platform amongst the broader membership to really talk through and also ask questions that they have and needs and feedback that they're looking for as well. And so, with that, I'll take a pause, and we'll have hopefully a lot of time for discussion. But in terms of getting involved, the major piece is join NTXIA as a member. And we're looking at all elements across the spectrum from a sector perspective. The one piece that we're not currently doing is an individual, like a single human individual membership. We're going to be rolling that in later this year. So right now it's organizational, at some level. So join that, reach out to get on the newsletter list and communication about events. And if you're interested in becoming a member, we have a little bit of detailed interest form on the website that we'd love for y'all to fill out, and then we can talk further about that process and how we bring folks on board. And then we'll obviously send the deck out after the fact, and so feel free to reach out to me via email or LinkedIn and carrier pigeon, whatever you need. But with that, I will stop running my mouth and look forward to hearing from y'all.
Right. Thank you very much, Jen. There's a whole lot to digest there, and I imagine that there's going to be some questions here.
I see some from, if people want to pop on, going in reverse order or from the beginning. I see Jennifer Keenan had some, I think, questions or comments if you want to pop on. And then Chelsea is here joining us, and she had some questions too. So
thank you for moderating. Just as a note, I appreciate it. I never know when to speak, and I don't like to interrupt. So grateful for the presentation. I really enjoyed the overview and also the model, right? It's very well defined. I always like infographics. It sounds like you're looking for membership. So I believe my company would fall in the startup category. Happy to look at membership. Are there other areas that we should engage, and really specific 2 to 3 priority focuses for this group? Like, where can we make the most difference right now? Where would you suggest we go from here, outside of bolstering the wonderful work that you're doing?
Oh, that's a great question. So specific to, I guess the question is specific to supporting NTXIA or supporting kind of throughout the ecosystem, or both?
Both. I heard the call to action at the end to join. So qualifying myself, I have a startup, so I wouldn't join as an individual, I join as a startup. But the question I put in the chat is more specific to, where do you see as an expert in your field, where do you see the biggest priorities or opportunities for us to engage, since the smart cities initiatives are vast and wide?
Yeah. So I think the first point would be, bringing your expertise, and that could be, and so understanding where those 6 kind of immediate focus areas are, and those may expand obviously, but does your company or product or service fit directly into one of those 6, or would you want to bring expertise in building concepts, or what small business support would be most beneficial to you? What would cause you to be able to expand? What do you need? Because that, the startup ecosystem specifically is an audience and a group of stakeholders that are part of this ecosystem and part of what we want the results of this work to be. So I think we could look at it in 2 ways: 1, functionally, and 2, from a subject specific piece. So so that's a long-winded way of saying, we want feedback and support and roundtables, to come together and really make sure that your perspective is heard. There's also, I think, going to be opportunities to pair with a municipality or with a large corporation where that would be beneficial. With the DIA, some of the startups we worked with were able to get certified and through the whole process with the large corporation. So then they were able to be a channel partner and things like that. So it's still shaping. I'm not going to lie, so, but I think that 1, the perspectives, 2, the expertise, what you're seeing, and 3, we can look really tactically, especially as some of those, use case kind of specific challenges
Sure.
down the pipe.
So we've already started a conversation with some large organizations. Some would qualify as large institutions or C3s, as well as private corporations. And so that model that you're displaying is something I'm already engaging in to foster the ability to launch, right? Because that's one of the reasons consortiums are such a successful model with smart cities. And I've observed that. I think the deck that you just showed is amazing, right? It does a really nice job, a concise job of displaying the information. So, and it was said very well. So there are a lot of people in smart cities that don't always, and it's not a critique. So it's a kudos to doing a great job of displaying the information. I think from a membership standpoint, knowing like what initiatives are already underway, because as a startup, right, so the founder hat, you're out forging relationships and building opportunities where you can, and landscape sensitivities exist because there are consortiums, right? It's public, private, government. And so how to enter and enter successfully, which benefits everyone, right, is really can be attributed to awareness. What initiatives are already underway, what corporations are already at the table, and what sensitivity should we have? So I think membership, your call to action at the end, is probably one of the best steps forward, right, to better understand what's going on, but also identifying like a key initiative, right? And I'm probably more device focused. There's a services component. So knowing other device plays, right, and categorizing myself into a certain pod, I think helps that conversation. So it sounds like membership is a good place to start. And then from an industry sense, there's no other big notes or call outs that you would make, but like, please plug in here, or here's something that I would be aware of. More like a pundit comment, less about like membership.
Well, I think best minds is the shortest way I would put it, because we're still looking at tactical and what that's going to look like as again, it's the intentionality, right, at the best minds, and really narrowing in priorities to a scale that, a new organization can do, right? And so I think it's being at the table, number 1. And then I think as we have, specific opportunities, like I'm immediately thinking about pairing with a research fellow. Would you want to be embedded on a specific project, within a city that has a very dead-on need? So a lot of this is matchmaking. How do we put the best resources with the highest need where that makes sense? So I apologize, that's still a little bit vague, but I'm happy to talk more about that.
Great. I'll reach out via email and do that. No, I think that's spot on, right? So being respectful and sensitive is understanding what initiatives and allowing for the matchmaking to occur. It sounds like membership is the best path. So I'll send a follow-up note. I don't want to dominate. I know there are other people patiently waiting.
Great.
Thank you.
Thrilled to have you, Jen.
Thank you.
Chelsea, are you around? There she's coming.
There's a couple Chelsea. So
I'm sorry, Chelsea Collier, who left a question. There are two Chelseas. My apologies. Thank you, Chelsea Collier.
Yeah. I think, the work that's been done here is really outstanding in all communities, whether you're looking at a regional effort of just one or two cities or, the vast number that's in the North Texas region. Just first of all, congratulations, Jen. This is really amazing how you pulled all this together. And so my question is really, are you receiving adequate support, and what signals are you getting from funders and investors and industry? My assumption is that this regional framework and the very clear, here's how you plug in and here's how we're functioning as a group is supporting some of that work. And so I just wanted to hear a bit more about that. And if there is an opportunity for folks to participate more, I hope that this is a good catalyst for that.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the kind words from both of y'all and the question. I mean, there's obviously real, very strong interest, and I'll say, there's very strong interest from the private equity community and that provide that CapEx and that financing to get these big projects done, and that's certainly very needed and a critical model to look at. I think when you talk about a regional approach, anytime that there can be, standards in place, every time I talk about, well, if we can create a collective RFP, that's very attractive when we look at modifying policy as being part of this. So how do we streamline? Can we have standard permitting processes across multiple jurisdictions? So it's a one size. What's inhibiting these investments from being made and whatnot. So I think always when you have that many voices in a room, one, approaching them gets you 30 voices instead of 30 meetings, right? I mean, that's always something that's helpful, and really understanding when a group like this comes together and they can prioritize and we know what a larger group needs. It makes it obviously much easier to know where to be most helpful and where to plug in, services, solutions, and proposals to that end.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I'd like to ask you a quick question. The nature of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, I mean, first of all, the fact that it earned the name Metroplex shows that it's kind of different than most areas in the country. Austin, we have a little bit different model where there's one city and there's 5 counties around it, and then some very tiny cities, but they're very much satellite cities. They're not on roughly equal scales in some way. What advice do you have for us that you think would translate to our different metro structure? And what advice might you give us here that might be different because of the nature of that different metro structure?
Oh, I wasn't on mute. I would look for the commonalities, which sounds really simple, but so I'll give you an example. So North Texas is basically DFW plus a couple of extra counties. So we go based on the borders of the Council of Governments. So it's even a little bit different than the metro is typically defined, or in some cases is approached. So there's already some small quirks and tweaks, around looking at those boundaries in different ways. But we have numbers as small as 5,000, as big as 1.3 million, or if you talk about counties or DART service area or whatnot. And the smaller cities are doing some of the most impressive work, the tiniest of towns. And so when I think about working together, it's where the commonalities and how do we get folks caught up, so it almost looks like a mentor-mentee relationship in terms of how, we need to be cohesive. We need to have the interoperability. So how do we make sure that everyone is on the same page to the extent possible? We're not going to solve all of these things. But how do we pick ways to elevate both those that are kind of catching up to neutral and those that are looking to accelerate? Does that answer your question, or are you talking about different government structures?
Just wondering if you think it'll be any different getting buy-in. We have CapCog here, which I just looked at their website. It used to be 5 counties. Now it's 10 counties in central Texas around Austin. And I think they say that they are 90 participants in it. So various towns and small towns within those 10 counties as well. And I'm just wondering what we can learn from you to try to activate this, or did it
Sure.
There may be some things that don't work as well for us not having a Dallas and a Fort Worth. And also, is Irving or Arlington, are they part of this as well?
Mhm. Yep. Yeah,
So
they
there's-
sure are.
There's cities that are all above us, sort of, you must be this tall. I mean, obviously, the tiny towns, like you said, they can also do smart communities and smart cities projects. But I'm just wondering if there's things that we need to do differently for not having but one city and then a lot of small towns.
So, okay, sorry, I very much, I get it now. So advice that I would give is really who is the broadest entity to have on board and sign on, because they already have touch points and communication and a structure. And then where would a group like this fit in amongst what's already being done or amongst the broad coalitions that exist? And so the planning organizations are a great one. I think economic development corporations are really important. And coming to the table here, and Opportunity Austin. Well, Austin's in the name. It's regionally focused, and so there's a lot of coordination around those efforts.
Okay.
There. So there's somebody that absolutely would speak with, and there's investment. The end game, and then the North Star, very very consistent. And so I would look at the Council of Governments. I would look at folks like Opportunity Austin. So basically, anchor umbrellas, and then differentiating as to what is this organization looking to achieve that is complementary would be my advice.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Yulia had a question. Did we get to that one, Jessica?
We have not yet. Yulia.
Hello, everybody. I have a project that actually got the seat in Austin Smart City Forum. It is about the document utilization and going online, etc., etc. And it's going forward and growing and growing. And I see it like market change in Texas. And I'm interested to know if you have any form application where I can submit the information so you can review it. If you can help with this project to push it faster or whatever. Do you have any kind of process for it?
Sure. Yeah. So if you want to go onto our website and fill out a form there and provide some more detail, we'll reach out and follow up and just learn a bit more and brainstorm and see if there's ways that we can help. But definitely, that's such an important area of involvement for all of us that would love to learn more. But I would start there, would be best.
Oh, thank you very much. And I have another small question. We do custom software development for 20 years, a little more already. And actually, I'm looking for problems, challenges in Texas that could be solved digitally with software. Again, do you have any kind of direction for me to go to be connected, to get to know what we can do to solve these problems?
I mean, there's a lot of them, and I think that obviously digital is not, it's not going to solve every element for every resident. It's a critical component to everything and every solution. So again, I think I would need another, I think we would need to talk it through, because there are 20 off the top of my head that probably would be helpful, specifically helpful places to start. So
that's great news.
Offline. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this connection, because while I was looking for the problem, here's somebody who knows all the problem. It's a great connection. Thank you very much, everybody, and especially to Jessica, Jay, and Austin City Forum. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Brad, did we answer your question?
I think we might have skipped over Brad. I'm so sorry.
Yep, thank you. Yep. That wasn't me. Yeah, my question really was around what kind of practical teaching tools are available, or can we help develop at Dallas College to help students or prospective students understand how they can use their talents and skills and abilities to plug into these types of initiatives. So it's kind of an introduction, but it's also a moment of inspiration as we help people understand what this is.
I love that question, and I can't wait to dig in more with you and have a follow up from our last conversation, because there were some good ideas coming there. So a couple of ideas, and one I'll just say personally, one of my goals this year is to write a children's book that introduces the concept to smart cities and how it's everywhere and solve community problems, et cetera. Obviously, we're not talking about children, but I think
I'll work on that with you, Jen. I'll just throw myself into there. Continue. I'll jump in on that. That sounds fun.
Maybe coloring books, we don't know. But the bottom line being, how do we, one is educating on the different scenarios, that the skills that Dallas College provides, whether it's the certifications and degree programs, how those plug in, and then really providing, an immediate thought is, creating I keep saying matchmaking, but I think there's so many ways for students to get involved and be embedded and contribute to solutions, both for the organization generally, but also for the individual municipalities and agencies. And so I think it would be great to create a way to tag opportunities or to really do placement. And maybe that's me coming in and talking to some of the guidance counselor staff or the academic advisors and you and I, and saying what would be ways that we could be part of the routing for opportunities as the students go through their process with y'all. So I think there's a lot there. I'll let my brain ruminate on it, but those are immediate thoughts. Is one, how do we introduce the concept in ways that are palatable and make sense, and in understanding of how this impacts daily life on a human level, but also what those careers are, and they're not as obscure as I think there's a perception that they are. Engineer doesn't mean what it used to necessarily in terms of the application, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Well, any other final questions from anybody? You can either throw it in the chat or just hop on. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for everything that you do. This was fantastic. Jade, did I hear your voice?
I just said thank you, Jen.
Yeah, the more Jen Sanditor is doing good in the world, the better. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us too. We had such a great crowd. If you're in Austin, we'd love to see you at the end of the month at our happy hour. Jennifer, if you're not in Austin, we'd also still love to see you at our happy hour on the 26th. Otherwise, we'll see everybody at the Nexus Texas Smart Cities series at the end of June 23rd. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.